Hi, I'm Joan Foster and I'm chair of the Manhood Peninsula Action Group. And you might ask, where is the Manhood Peninsula? It's a narrow peninsula of land shaped like that south of Chichester in West Sussex, and it runs from the A27 down to Selsey Bill. And the A27 is the key issue because that's what we're talking about today. For the first time, we're going to hear the true story of what happened to cause the Department of Transport to withdraw northern options for the A27 at Chichester from Highways England's consultation process, with just 2 weeks' notice in 2016. How government makes decisions is of particular relevance at the moment. Is it a question of who you know, who has powerful connections, who can influence ministers at high level? You will draw your own conclusions. I'm going to be talking to 3 people today. Louise Goldsmith, past leader of West Sussex County Council, now retired from the council in 2021. Peter Montin, a current West Sussex County Councillor, just re-elected for the Witterings division. And Mike Dicker, a Manhood resident who has worked tirelessly through Freedom of Information requests to unearth the truth. I know people might say, well, that's history, so what's the point of digging it over now? The point is that decisions should be made with honesty, transparency and accountability, and be made for reasons that benefit the local population and not vested interests. These concerns have been dismissed as gossip by our MP Gillian Keegan and others. Today you can decide whether you agree. We're going to start with Louise Goldsmith, who will set the scene and talk about what actually happened. Peter Montin will look at the long historical saga of the A27, a problem for more than 40 years. Mike Dicker will tell us what prompted him to attempt to uncover the truth. So Louise, can you set the scene for us back in 2015? What was happening then?
It was a bit longer than 2015. 2013 they started working on the outline plans for the A27, and in 2015 in July they had come to settle on 7 plans, and the idea was to give a confidential briefing to all councillors to see for them to be informed ahead of the consultation. And of course councillors from the north were extremely distressed, and I'm afraid that a lot of people forgot the confidentiality issue. And so in the summer the consultation was already known that the consultation would actually have the northern option, which caused a huge amount of angst with a lot of people. And it was almost at that stage that lines were drawn.
So at that stage, Louise, there were 7 designs on the table, and presumably this had taken a lot of money to reach that stage. And the other thing is the northern option is for the A27 to be rerouted around the north of Chichester instead of making changes to the current route along the south of Chichester. It would just skirt round Chichester, miss the South Downs National Park and Goodwood, and then come out to rejoin the A27. So there was a huge cost with this.
So it was the last Friday in November. It was 5:30 my meeting, and I drove over after being at council all day to meet the Duke and his advisor. And obviously they put the case that they were deeply worried about the consultation, the inclusion of the northern option, and how it would impact on Goodwood. And for me, I wondered about that because it did not go through the lovely Goodwood Park. The road was nowhere near the racecourse, but weaved up on the edge of the estate and indeed on the edge of the AONB. However, the Duke was very keen to know what my position was, whether I was anti or pro-northern bypass, and what stance I would take. And I had to say that I would not make any stance until the consultation had been through and it had been agreed by full council. And I had to explain the rather bureaucratic process, as once the consultation runs, then it goes to our scrutiny committee and debated at full council. And it would be wrong for any leader to come out one way or another at that particular time. Whether he really liked that particular stance that I took or found it disappointing, we'll never know.
Okay, so Louise, the scene is set. We have had leaks of the consultation, so it's out in the public domain. You've had firm pressure put on to say you should oppose it, and the public is already becoming aware that this is going to happen, and we all expect to have a northern option to discuss. So what happened next?
At that meeting, it came a time when I came under extreme pressure. I had a volume of freedom of information requests about me, emails, various things which came from various parties. And actually, those freedom of information requests cost a lot of money, and there were many. And interestingly, in the January, I had various people coming to parish councils, really intimidatory behaviour, asking me questions about my position on the A27, trying to get me to say whether I was for or not. And of course they didn't win, but it was so bad that at one particular parish council they asked me not to go out into the car park alone because they were so frightened for my safety. But then we had the really positive focus on the consultation, and towards the end of February we had signed off the joint press releases, which are common. Both comms teams, the communications team from Highways England, West Sussex County Council had meetings, everything was agreed. And I was really, really hopeful that that particular consultation would actually slice the boil of what was growing as a real tension. And it all seemed to be going very well. So everything was in the bag. We had just under 2 weeks before the consultation started. And then one evening, Monday, I was asked if I would stay on because Highways England wanted to come down and talk to me. And this was very odd. So the next day they arrived, 6:30 in the evening, a director and a senior manager. And to say they were grim as they came into my office was an understatement. And in that office I had with me obviously the cabinet member for transport, and I had a very senior executive director, very experienced person. And the message was quite simple. They had come to tell me that the Secretary of State, Patrick McLaughlin, had actually cancelled the consultation, and in doing so he had withdrawn the northern option off the table. I'm not very often stuffed short for words, but I have to say that we were all aghast at the message. And despite the questioning and the challenging, those two gentlemen, who were obviously under a lot of pressure and obviously felt extremely uncomfortable about the message they were delivering, could tell me no more. To say it was devastating would be an understatement.
So, Louise, what you're telling us is that everything was ready to go, the whole system was set up, everything was agreed, and then suddenly, 2 weeks before the consultation was due to start, it was all pulled. Whatever did you do after that?
Well, it was for Highways England to cascade that particular message, which they were responsible for. But obviously we were completely shattered, as was everybody else. And the emails flooded in to say, when is the consultation going to happen and what has happened? And of course there was no answer. So we obviously didn't stop there. The cabinet member for transport wrote, and we were challenging, and we got nothing. Highways England is incredibly good at stonewalling anybody and not communicating, and they certainly lived up to that reputation. But the cabinet member also went 6 weeks later to another A27 consultation over towards the Brighton way. And during that community consultation, somebody asked how secure was their presentation going to be. And so it was very interesting at that stage when an officer from Highways England said, oh, well, you see, what happened was 2 MPs went in and had that consultation withdrawn because it impacted on Goodwood. And my cabinet member was so shocked and distressed at the absolute corruption of the whole thing. He phoned me at about 9:30, 10:15 to tell me, which, I mean, it was completely shocking. And so we then started on a very large campaign of writing to Highways England and challenging them, and we got nowhere. And then we suddenly got an invite to meet the chief executive of Highways England at the time, Jim O'Sullivan, and we went up to the Guildford office to meet him. And that particular meeting, he had no officers in the room. It was once again, the same executive director, cabinet member, and myself. And we went in and met him, and he said, well, I need to explain to you that 2 of the MPs went to see Patrick McLaughlin, put the case that this was going to damage Goodwood, and Patrick McLaughlin actually pulled the whole scheme. And that in itself was pretty shocking. It wasted over 35-40 million of taxpayers' money. It absolutely had no respect for one person in the community who was actually really looking forward to that consultation and putting their comments in.
Remember that, Louise? I was living here at the time and there was a whole furore in the papers about is there a consultation or isn't there a consultation? And then suddenly you're presented with this information about 2 MPs. Can we hazard a guess as to who they are?
So during that discussion with Jim O'Sullivan, he explained that 2 local MPs had gone to see Patrick McLaughlin to put the case that the northern option should not be in that consultation. They were deeply concerned about the impact on Goodwood. And on that hearing, Patrick McLaughlin, as you know, withdrew the consultation and took out the northern option. And it is quite shocking because I think everybody was looking forward to that consultation and it was gone. So then Jim O'Sullivan explained that they would be running a 2-week consultation at the end of July without the northern option, all the other schemes as were stood. And I thought that was pretty outrageous because 2 weeks at the end of July means people are going on holiday in those days. They were off school holidays. And so we got it extended right the way through until September with considerably more sites where they could go to the consultation. And it was a very small win, but it was something. And then they ran the consultation.
So they ran the consultation and then we waited for the results to come out. Now, how did that happen?
We were told that the results of the consultation probably early November at a push, end of October. But October came, we heard nothing from Highways England, the usual stonewalling, and this continued. And I'm really grateful to the Chichester Observer playing a key role in pressing and raising this issue on behalf of their readers. People wanted to know the result of the consultation. They approached West Sussex County Council to see if we knew, and we had to say we knew nothing because we knew nothing. And that went right the way through most of November, and then we were called up for a meeting at Highways England, this time in London. And once again, it was the executive director, the then cabinet member who had changed, Jim O'Sullivan, and an assistant. And he came into the room with a piece of paper which had 47% on it. And when he put it on the table, he said, this is the result of the consultation. 47% of people do not want any option. And I did control myself not to say, I told you so. This was evident. People were so hacked off that they would put that. And Jim Sullivan said, we can't build a road when 47% of the community, the responses in the consultation, have come out against it. And I think the community expressed their absolute disgust about what had happened. As one woman said to me, Louise, I'm not sure I want a northern option, but I want the option to say whether I do or not, and that's been taken away from me. And that's not democratic.
So, after all that, where we get to is the choice was no option, 47%. So, where did that lead the county council? How did you try and put things back together?
I could say it was a year of bombshells, actually, and that bombshell came. But we actually had Chris Grayling, who was then the cabinet member, the Secretary of State for Transport, came to a private Conservative dinner. And during that dinner in December, he was asked by quite a few people who were for and against the Northern Bypass, what did he think, what would he do? And he actually said at that meeting he would be prepared to look at it and rerun the consultation, which everybody felt was very reasonable and was very hopeful. And after Christmas, there was a campaign for that to happen. And at that point, Chris Grayling then pulled the consultation completely. And it was an act of petulance, but it was actually quite shrewd of him. He knew he couldn't run the same consultation. He knew he didn't want to bring back the northern option, so he took that opportunity to trash it at the expense of the community and all the issues around the A27. And so we had a very divided, upset community. And one of the things a politician, local or national, should do is try and unify your community. Split communities are not good. And so I started to hold a session of meetings called Build a Better A27, which was people who were against the northern option and people who were. We put some money on it on behalf of the taxpayers, and we had consultants, Sistra, to come and look at the options. Now, this was very small scale. We couldn't throw millions at this at all. But through those workshops, we actually came to a point where eventually those community, the attendees at that meeting, voted for what they wanted. And that brought the community together really well. And they wanted a mitigated northern route. I think everybody didn't want to spoil the environment, and a mitigated northern route is totally feasible and possible with minimum impact on the environment, with the option of a fallback of looking at a mitigated, almost mitigated southern route as well. And so that recommendation went to both councils, West Sussex County Council and Chichester District Council. And at both of those councils, the majority vote, which meant that that is the policy of both councils and still stands to this day, is that they are for a mitigated northern route with a second southern route. And there we stand. Now, the funding has gone on. There's been various meetings which I could talk about, which I went to with Gillian Keegan at Highways England, but nothing's happened except for the traffic's got worse, air pollution's got worse, the misery's got worse, but we've got nothing. So the policy stands as a mitigated northern route with the option of the southern route. But we have to remember that most of the engineers have almost discounted the southern route because it is so tortuous with the canal, limited land available. It really isn't a runner, and the mitigated northern one is. But as it stands, as we are here now, nobody has to make a decision because nothing's happening again. And yet we see with the Arundel bypass, they have made substantial contributions to changing that route and making it more environmentally friendly. So we could go down the Dutch route and have a really mitigated northern green route, but that takes political will. And that's what we've got at the moment, no political will.
Thank you, Louise. That has been so illuminating. I think we all suspected things were going on that we didn't know about, and we're going to find out more about that later, talking about the Freedom of Information investigation. But where we are is that two councils, West Sussex County Council, Chichester District, have voted for a mitigated northern route. If you live around here, you know that the southern route, the southern bypass, is gridlocked. It is getting worse and worse. And if we were to start to even contemplate building it to change it, I think we might all just have to sit in our homes and never go out again. So we're going to go on now to look back at some of the history of this poor road, the A27. So we've heard the recent history about what has happened in the decision making concerning the A27. But this has been going on for many, many, many years. And though Peter Montin, who is our West Sussex County Councillor for the Witterings Division, again on the Manhood Peninsula, south of the A27, so he knows all about the struggles we have with the traffic trying to get to and fro to Chichester. But he's been looking back at the history, and we have been discussing this, making plans about this for many years, including an investigation 40 years ago. So Peter, can you tell us what happened then?
Joan, yes, thank you. In order to trace the development of the A27 as we know it between Havant and Chichester and how it connected up with the bypass, we really need to go back to 1937 and 1938 when the first town map and development plans were being worked on. And then after the interruption of World War and in the early 50s, it then continued and the first development plan was agreed. You just have to bear in mind that at that time, but before the war and immediately afterwards, the county council was still run by landed gentry living up in the very north of the district. The idea then was that any development that would take place would be to the south of the city, and therefore staying away from the more sensitive nature sites. In '54, there was a first inquiry where the development plan first started talking about where a link where the new road should be, and in '67 there was an inquiry where again this was confirmed by the county council together with Havant and Hampshire that it would be roughly where it is now. In 1974 there was a consultation in which the department was involved, at which over 60% of participants or respondents said that they would prefer a northern route, but that was put to one side and the development plan was confirmed. In the mid-70s, the Department of Transport then first published its preferred route, which is really what it is now. But between then and where we are now, an inquiry took place, a very extensive inquiry. It started in late '79, ended 5 months later in May of 1980 under Inspector Sims. And the purpose of this inquiry was really to establish whether the orders could be made, a legal process, the orders whereby the road as proposed by Department of Transport could be given a legal status and could be enacted. So that was the questions that the inquiry had to answer. Now, that inquiry was extremely thorough, and many witnesses spoke, of course, first of all, the Department of Transport, West Sussex County Council, Chichester District Council, many other parties, residents groups, for and against with different ideas. And so it was around the route as proposed by the Department of Transport. But there were also two other routes being proposed which were examined in detail. One was called Route 13, the other one was Route 4. Route 4 is not to be confused with Route 4 that came later in 2016. The numbering is purely coincidental. So those two routes were also looked at. At the end of it all, and cutting it, the whole long story short, a massive report was produced here, 270 odd pages by Inspector Sims. And there's some interesting passages in there that I just want to read to you. At the end of it, in his findings, as he calls it, he says, I do not accept that a route around the north of Chichester would be seriously damaging to the landscape, to residential areas, or to established planning policies. And he goes on to say, I am not convinced that the county and district's planning policies would be seriously prejudiced, or that development pressures on sensitive areas would increase by reason of the new road. Now, he then goes on to discuss a bit more around this Route 4, around the north of the city, to what its advantages are. And very interestingly, he makes 2 points. One is that he finds that the effect on agriculture is no worse than what the Department of Transport proposal is. He also makes the comment, and this is 40 years ago that he says this, that if the northern route were built, then the bypass, because the bypass was already there, would then become what he calls a useful local distributor road. So that was already established 40 years ago, which we keep saying now. So he then concludes by saying that he has examined with great care many visits, and he mentions the fact that he, including in the winter months, has been up in the Downs, including the Trundle, to get an impression of what a road in the setting would be from a variety of viewpoints. And he's been helped a lot with maps and diagrams from the county, and he mentions in particular the Trundle that he's been to. And he then says, I have to say, albeit humbly, that I have come to a different conclusion. In my judgment, a new trunk road on the general line of Route 4, that's a northern route, could be assimilated into the landscape without the severe damage that has been suggested, and would, in due course, and because of the wooded character of the route, be little seen. So he then ends by saying that his conclusion is, in his view, that Route 4 is preferable to the Department of Transport's trajectory as proposed by the Ministry. Having come to that conclusion, he says that it follows from my conclusion that Route 4 is preferable to the others, that I am therefore unable to recommend that the draft orders should be made. Remember, the orders which would legally enable the road to be built. So he addresses this, and it's ironically, it's signed on the 8th of May, which is exactly 40 years ago, in 1981, to the two Secretaries of State, Heseltine for the Environment and Fowler in Transport, now both in the House of Lords. So this exhaustive inquiry notwithstanding, and contrary to Inspector Sims's clear inclusions in the report to the Secretary of State that I just mentioned, the orders in question were made nevertheless, and the section of the A27 between Hampton and Chichester was constructed as we know it today, and as was intended all along by the Department and by the County Council. Anyone reading this, and particularly what you've just heard from Rees Goldsmith, I think would be quite entitled to ask themselves why it is that every time a northern route is mentioned, it is pushed sideways, if not even brushed under the carpet. I think that people could legitimately ask themselves that question. So the evidence is here, the early history, starting just before World War II, right through to 1981, 40 years ago.
Thank you, Peter. That's been absolutely fascinating. All these years, people are saying, actually, the only way to solve this problem is a northern route. But nobody's listened so far. Hopefully they might in the future. But we need to go back a little bit longer, because we need to find out what really happened behind all the shenanigans with no, you can't, 2 weeks before the consultation, no, we're going to pull it. And the person who's been helping do that over the last couple of years is Mike Dicker. He's a manhood resident, and he's been using freedom of information to great effect to really unravel the truth. So, Mike, let's tell us all about it.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you for the opportunity to go over some of the exploits I've had in the last 4 to 5 years coming to what I term uncovering the truth about the 2016 consultation. I suppose it's worth saying that in July or August, I can't remember exactly when, I was attending the consultation event at Bracklesham Barn, and I walked into this small barn that looks a little like a sports school hall with the flooring, and there were lots of display boards in a U shape, and I'd heard a lot about the A27, etc., and I was looking forward to an all transparent, open consultation about this wonderful new A27 that we were going to build. And I looked at the left-hand boards and realised that there was this thing saying options 1 to 5, and if I recollect, there was also an option 6, but that 4 and 5 were these 2 northern routes. As I came around the display boards, mysteriously, there were 5 options still, but they were all southern options. And I can't remember exactly the numbers, but let's say it was 1, 1A, 2, 2A, and there were subsets and everything else. But what was clearly missing was the 2 routes that went north, which were, to me, the shortest route, because there's this wonderful bowl of the A27 and a direct route that goes to the north of the city. And I asked one of the people there as to why there were no northern options and why they weren't being offered to us, etc. And more importantly, perhaps, is why these options had been mysteriously removed. We'd heard about them, and we heard them as viable options, etc., but they weren't on the display. And no one could tell me. And no one could tell me why the original consultation in, I think it was March/April of that year, hadn't gone ahead. And so that prompted me to, unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately, ask some questions. And in particular, I started on my journey of freedom of information requests, and started asking the questions as to why those decisions had been made, why the northern options had been dropped, and what pressure or influence had been brought to bear. Finally, in July 2017, the Information Commissioner ruled that Highways England had to disclose information to me. Noted it took nearly a year, and a formal complaint to the Information Commissioner. And I do remember a meeting I had up in Guildford in Highways England's offices, where not only were they asking me once again what information I wanted, bearing in mind it had been very clear in my freedom of information request, but I do recollect the officer at Highways England saying, "It's very inconvenient, all these FOI requests that you're making. Can we ensure that after we've disclosed this information to you, you cease and desist?" And I basically said, well, I can't give you that assurance. I need to make sure that the information is being disclosed to me. So I suppose what we need to do is discover what I learnt. And I apologise for using the cards, but some of this I have to read to you because it's a matter of fact. So in sort of chronological order, I learnt that in a meeting at Highways England on the 18th of December 2015, Peter Adams, who was effectively the lead for the Chichester scheme, the A27 and everything else, stated, "There are mixed messages here. Government has asked us for a strategy that is short-term, which isn't right. But we are spending money to look at options that defend why we are doing what is not right." So that's the lead for this whole programme and the consultation, saying that we're spending money looking at options and proposing those to the public in a consultation, and pressure being applied. The next thing I learnt was that in early January 2016, the Goodwood estate arranged a meeting at Goodwood, Goodwood House particularly, for Highways England, the South Downs National Park Authority Board and Goodwood Estate itself. Invites were sent to all, including Lord Marland, for the 8th of January 2016. The meeting was delayed until the 26th of January 2016, but that was the date that the meeting went ahead. Lord Marland, and I'll explain who Lord Marland is and where he fits into this, wrote on the 5th of January that he could not attend the new date on the 26th because he was out of the country. I believe he was in the Middle East, possibly Qatar, but I can't confirm that. The meeting on the 26th included lunch and a Goodwood presentation to both the South Downs National Park Authority and the Highways England. And 8 slides of that presentation, which I got from the South Downs National Park Authority, outline the effect of northern options for the A27 on the Goodwood estate. I can't tell you what those outline concerns were because they're all redacted. 8 slides that are completely blacked out that I can't see.
So just to be clear, where we have is a meeting held at Goodwood, hosted at Goodwood, and a presentation made by the Goodwood estate. But if I'm correct, this was a meeting for statutory consultees who were looking at the the A27 and the consultation. So I don't imagine Goodwood was one of those, was it?
Don't know, you're right. The Goodwood estate is not a statutory consultee, nor is Lord Marland. Statutory consultees, as far as Highways England are concerned, are local councils. They are South Downs National Park Authority and those sorts of organisations, Natural England, and the people that have an effect or an influence on the road building. Another one in this area is the Harbour Conservancy, for example. They're a statutory consultee. A landowner is a consultee just like a member of the public is. So they don't have any rights to early intervention or early consideration and debate with the agency that is now Highways England. And so yes, why were Goodwood able to be consulted at that meeting? And one asks the question but hasn't got the answer. What I do know is that Highways England presentation at that 26th of January meeting said, no decision will be made on any particular option prior to consultation. It will include 2 northern options. So Goodwood were at a meeting on the 26th of January where Highways England said that 2 northern options would be included in the consultation. What I do know is that Lord Marland wrote to the Secretary of State for Transport in January, and we have never seen a copy of that letter, and I've never been able to get hold of a copy. What we also know is on the 3rd of March, a letter from Andrew Jones, the Under Secretary of State at the Department for Transport at that time, was sent to Lord Marland, Andrew Tyree, MP for Chichester, Nick Herbert, the MP for Arundel, and in that letter it stated, to be clear, this will not include alternative routes such as a northern route which could impact on the Goodwood estate. Now what it's worth saying is that one of the challenges I made to Highways England all the way through that year whilst I was doing FOI was why certain elements of that letter were redacted. And in particular, the bit that was redacted was the Goodwood estate. It was always redacted and they always fought to keep that secret until the Information Commissioner made them disclose the bit that said, such as a northern route which could impact on the Goodwood estate. Now we all knew it was Goodwood estate under the black redacting, but we didn't have that as the evidence, but now we do. Following on from that letter, on the 9th of March 2016, Lord Marland met Andrew Jones, who I've mentioned before, And that meeting was called by Lord Marland with, and I quote, concerns that the proposals include options for a northern bypass. In May 2016, Highways England meeting, which is called the MPIDC, I don't know what the MPIDC is, but the minutes state the construction costs of 123.66 million will be split on a 50-50 basis in Road Investment Strategy 1 and Road Investment Strategy 2. This is based on option 1A. Now, I can't remember exactly which 1A was, but it was one of the lesser options that really was not popular. Minutes of the A27 scheme also acknowledged that option 2, which was the Highways England preferred option, was unaffordable. So in May 2016, Highways England knew that the option 2, which was their preferred option in the 2016 consultation, was unaffordable. And one of the reasons stressed for getting rid of the northern options was that they were not online and that they were unaffordable. Yet option 2, which is the preferred option, was also unaffordable. Yeah.
Becky, we just pause. So all the discussions then were only about southern routes, and option 2, the preferred one, but actually it was unaffordable. Again, this does not make sense. But Mike, I'd just like you to take you back. You mentioned a letter from Lord Marland with concerns about the impact on the Goodwood estate. I don't know who Lord Marland is and why he's involved with this. He's not to do with transport, is he?
Good question, Joan. Lord Marland. I likewise was confused as to why this chap called Lord Marland was so heavily involved in the A27 Chichester bypass scheme. And so through a roundabout way, perhaps, I can explain who Lord Marland is. He was heavily involved in the David Cameron government, and at some point was, I can't remember his exact role, but something to do with international trade, something to do with fostering development out in the Middle East, links to Qatar and other Arab states. And there are examples of pictures of him involved with tickets for troops and various other charities, and pictures of him with David Cameron, with his wife, and various other not popular, but published links of Lord Marland. But I still couldn't see what the link with Lord Marland to Goodwood was, and why this individual was so concerned and afforded the privilege of a meeting with a minister, and likewise an influence onto the Chichester bypass. So I actually wrote to the Lord's Commissioner for Standards and asked or lodged a complaint as to why Lord Marland, a member of the Lords, was being, given this influence and this ability to potentially be involved as a consultee, a statutory consultee, because of the meeting at Goodwood, which I know he didn't attend because of the date change. And the response from the Commissioner for Standards was, Lord Marland has been a personal friend of the Duke of Richmond for many years, and he does not have, nor has had, any business or otherwise relationship with the Goodwood estate. He wrote to the Minister because he was personally concerned about the environmental impacts of one of the options of the proposed bypass on the Goodwood estate. So I still don't understand why someone that doesn't live in the area is concerned about the impact of the environmental impacts of one of the options of the proposed bypass. I suppose if he's concerned, maybe he should have been involved in the Arundel bypass options as well. I don't know, but I suspect he hasn't been involved on the environmental issues associated with that. I'd like to cover one other thing, which is just a new thing, which is in April 2021, an MP from Sefton has called for an investigation into the insidious cover-up culture at Highways England. In the attached emails, a Highways England spokesperson is quoted as saying, "Colleagues at Highways England deployed the same tactics at Chichester, referring to the controversial A27 Chichester bypass scheme." I'm trying to get hold of those, those politicians and the papers that have exposed this to explain the problems we've had getting information. But I suppose one of the things I'm also conscious of is that our current MP, Gillian Keegan, has promised in her election manifesto in December 2019, I think it was, to push for an open, transparent, all options consultation on the A27. And I personally think that people in the Manhood Peninsula and wider in Chichester will hold her to that promise.
Thank you, Mike. I don't know if we really fully understand how much work it takes for somebody like Mike to go through the freedom of information process. This isn't just a question of send me the information. You have to go on and on, you go backwards and forwards. And only through that dedication do the facts, the true facts, start to emerge. And this is why we have been making this video now, so that we can really understand what did happen way back in, well, from 1981 and then into 2015, 2016 with the failed consultation on the future of the A27. But the work Louise Goldsmith did was to bring together for a better A27, and West Sussex County Council and Chichester District Council both voted for a mitigated northern bypass. That is where they are. Gillian Keegan, as Mike has said, promised a full consultation, but nothing is happening at the moment. So we know the truth from the past, we never want that repeated in the future, and finally we have to get to grips to solve what is an intolerable problem for all the residents of Chichester and the Manhood Peninsula.